Eddie Rickenbacker, a former race car driver, was on a path to becoming America's top WWI ace. On April 23, 1918, he chased a German Falls over Pont-à-Mousson. He had charmed his way into the air service at 27, and now he pressed the triggers, watching tracers tear into the enemy plane. It was his first aerial victory, but many dogfights and dangers still lay ahead. Years earlier, in the infancy of flight, a different kind of aviator risked everything. Cal Rodgers was one of them. On September 17, 1911, a daredevil named Cal Rodgers climbed into a frail biplane called the Vin Fiz and took off from a horse track in Brooklyn, New York. His goal was to fly across the entire United States within 30 days for a $50,000 prize offered by the newspaper magnate William Randolph Hearst. Most people thought he was mad, and the bookies in New York would not take bets on him making it past the Hudson River. Rodgers flew a modified Wright Model EX with a 35 horsepower engine and fabric stretched over a wooden frame, a machine that was little more than a flying matchstick. Over the next 49 days, he crashed into chicken coops, dodged lightning storms, broke his leg, and had his face burned by boiling oil when a cylinder exploded. The Vin Fiz was repaired so many times during the journey. By the time Rodgers reached Pasadena, California, the only original parts left were the vertical rudder, the oil drip pan, and a single wing strut. 3 days later, he crashed on a Pacific beach, breaking both legs, several ribs, and his collarbone. He died in another crash. 5 months after that, his neck broken when a seagull jammed his rudder and sent his plane tumbling into the earth. That was the world of flight in the early years of the 20th century. Pilots died somewhere every day, and the actuarial life of an aviator was measured in months, not years. It was into this dangerous, thrilling arena that 3 American boys were being drawn, each from a background of poverty and each destined to transform aviation through combat endurance and science. In Columbus, Ohio, a pugnacious young race car driver named Eddie Rickenbacker had grown up in a house without running water or electricity. He was the son of Swiss-German immigrants who beat him for asking too many questions. By 1917, he was one of the top automobile racers in America. But when President Woodrow Wilson asked Congress for a declaration of war against Germany on April 2nd of that year, Eddie Rickenbacker decided to leave the racetrack and join the fight. The question was whether the Army would accept a 27-year-old mechanic without a college degree, too old by regulation to become a fighter pilot. Could he serve in the new and deadly profession of aerial combat? Rickenbacker arrived in France in the summer of 1917 as a staff sergeant, driving for General John Pershing's staff. He had charmed his way past the Army's age limit with help from an old friend, Colonel T.F. Dodd, whose airplane engine he had fixed in a cow pasture back in California. General Billy Mitchell recognized the racer's determination and arranged for his pilot training. After just 17 days at a French flying school, Rickenbacker earned his wings. By early 1918, he was assigned to the 94th Aero Pursuit Squadron, the soon-to-be famous Hat in the Ring gang. The squadron's operations officer was a seasoned combat pilot named Raoul Lufbery. He had shot down 16 German planes with the Lafayette Escadrille and was one of the most respected flyers on the Western Front. Lufbery took the older Rickenbacker under his wing, drilling him on how to scan the sky for hidden enemies. On their first patrol together, Rickenbacker saw nothing but empty sky. Lufbery pointed out shrapnel holes in his plane from anti-aircraft fire he had missed completely. Rickenbacker realized how much he still had to learn. On the evening of April 23, 1918, Rickenbacker got his chance. A German Falls fighter crossed the lines near Pont-à-Mousson, and he gave chase with his flight leader. Rickenbacker put his Newport on the German's tail and pressed the triggers. Tracer bullets streamed into the enemy fuselage. The Falls settled into a long, graceful spiral and crashed near the German lines. Rickenbacker had scored his first aerial victory. Enjoying the story? Subscribe to join us for the next one. 3 weeks later, on the morning of May 19th, the squadron was scattered when a large German two-seater appeared over the airfield, brazenly taking photographs. Raoul Lufbery watched from his barracks and felt disgust at the weak response from the pilots who took off to intercept it. He jumped on a motorcycle and sped to the hangars. His own plane was down for repairs, so he borrowed a Newport belonging to another pilot. Within minutes, he was airborne and climbing toward the enemy. Lufbery closed on the German and opened fire, but his machine gun jammed. He broke off, cleared the jam, and attacked again. The German returned fire, and suddenly Lufbery's plane was engulfed in flames. With the cockpit burning around him, the major climbed out of his seat. He leaped from the blazing machine. Lufbery fell onto a picket fence in the rose garden of a peasant woman's cottage behind the village of Marin. He died instantly. The woman recognized him from newspaper photographs and covered his broken body with flower petals. The news hit the 94th Squadron like a physical blow. For Rickenbacker, the loss of his mentor changed everything. He would no longer see aerial combat as a game. In the months after Lufbery's death, Rickenbacker seemed unstoppable. The squadron traded its unreliable Newports for the new Spad XIII, a rugged fighter with a 220 horsepower engine that could reach 135 miles per hour. Rickenbacker developed his own tactics, attacking German observation balloons defended by nests of machine guns and anti-aircraft cannons. His tally climbed steadily through the summer battles of Chateau Thierry and St. Mihiel. By September 1918, he was the new American ace of aces. On October 30th, 1918, Rickenbacker spotted two Fokkers from Richthofen's Flying Circus stalking an Allied plane near the Argonne Forest. The German fighters had red-painted noses, the mark of the elite squadron. Rickenbacker dove on the nearest one and poured fire into its fuel tank. The Fokker burst into flames and tumbled from the sky. It was his 26th confirmed victory of the war. He did not know it then, but it would be his last. On November 11, 1918, the guns fell silent. Rickenbacker took off that morning and flew low over the trenches near Verdun as the ceasefire took hold. The war was over and America's ace of aces was coming home a hero. But the age of flight was still young. In California, a young man named Jimmy Doolittle was just learning to fly Army planes. In Minnesota, a farm boy named Charles Lindbergh was dreaming of the air. On the morning of May 20th, 1927, a young man in a leather flight jacket stood beside a silver airplane on a muddy runway in New York. Charles Lindbergh was 25 years old. The plane beside him was called the Spirit of St. Louis. It was a custom-built monoplane with a single Wright Whirlwind engine and fuel tanks crammed into every spare inch of space. The forward fuel tank was so large it blocked the windshield entirely. Lindbergh could not see straight ahead. He had to use a periscope and look out side windows to taxi. He had no parachute either, because every pound of weight mattered more than any safety net. Dawn broke wet and gray over Roosevelt Field as Lindbergh climbed into the cramped cockpit. The runway was soft from days of rain. Mechanics had worried the plane would bog down before it could lift off. At 7:52 a.m., the chocks were pulled, and the Spirit of St. Louis lurched forward. It gathered speed slowly, heavily, like a bird too full of fuel to fly. Then, at the last possible moment, it lifted clear of the telephone lines at the far end of the field and climbed into the eastern sky. Lindbergh was alone. Ahead lay 3,600 miles of open ocean, and if he made it, the Orteig Prize in Paris. For more than 30 hours, Lindbergh fought the thing that kills pilots faster than any storm, fatigue. He flew through fog banks over Newfoundland. Ice formed on the wings, and he had to climb and dive to shake it off. Thunderheads rose like mountains in the dark, and he threaded his way between them by starlight. His eyes burned. His hands ached from gripping the controls. At one point, he later wrote, he saw phantom shapes in the back of the fuselage, friendly vapor-like figures that spoke to him and gave advice. His mind was playing tricks to keep itself awake. On the evening of May 21st, after 33 hours and 30 minutes in the air, Lindbergh saw the lights of the French coast. He crossed the English Channel at twilight and followed the Seine River toward Paris. Le Bourget Field had no runway lights, and he had never landed there, but the crowd solved his problem. Thousands of cars surrounded the field with headlamps blazing, and tens of thousands of people spilled across the grass. Lindbergh set the Spirit of St. Louis down gently on the dark turf. Before the propeller stopped turning, the crowd broke through the fences and swept toward him. He had done it. The Lone Eagle had crossed the Atlantic alone by 1929. Fog had become the deadliest enemy in the air. More pilots died from flying into clouds and losing their bearings than from combat or mechanical failure. On the foggy morning of September 24th at Mitchell Field on Long Island, Army First Lieutenant Jimmy Doolittle prepared to settle the question once and for all. Doolittle held a doctorate in aeronautical engineering from MIT. He had been lent by the Army to head a project financed by the Guggenheim Fund for the promotion of aeronautics. The goal was simple: prove that a pilot could fly entirely by instruments, with no view of the outside world. Doolittle strapped himself into the rear cockpit of a consolidated NY-2 Navy training biplane, a rugged two-seat trainer with wooden wings and fabric fuselage. Then came the critical modification. Ground crew lowered a hood of heavy varnished canvas over the cockpit. They cinched it tight with leather ties so that Doolittle saw nothing but the dim glow of his instrument panel. The hood smelled of dried dope and canvas, and it blocked every scrap of outside light. When the engine caught and the plane vibrated beneath him, Doolittle faced the hardest part of the test. Everything a pilot learns by instinct told him to use his eyes to feel the plane's attitude. The instruments, a sensitive altimeter, a compass, a turn and bank indicator, and an airspeed gauge, were crude by later standards. Doolittle had to force himself to ignore the pull in his stomach and the pressure in his seat, and trust the needles on those dials instead. He taxied out, pushed the throttle forward, and lifted the NY-2 into the gray sky. Once airborne, Doolittle flew a carefully planned 15-mile course over the Long Island countryside. Inside the canvas hood, he could feel the plane respond to every gust, but the turn and bank indicators seemed to lag just behind his own sense of motion. Vertigo pulled at him repeatedly. Several times his body told him the plane was banking when the instrument said it was level. He learned to obey the needles, not his nerves. The most dangerous moment came during the landing approach. Without outside references, judging height was nearly impossible. Doolittle had practiced this phase countless times on the ground. Memorizing the feel of the controls at low altitude, he reduced power, held the nose steady, and let the NY-2 settle toward the runway. The wheels touched the grass with a gentle bump, and Doolittle rolled to a stop without ever having seen the ground. He had been in the air for roughly 15 minutes. The total distance flown was small, but the implications were enormous. Doolittle had demonstrated that weather no longer had to ground an airplane. Fog, clouds, rain, darkness, none of them were automatically fatal any longer. The age of instrument flying had begun, and commercial aviation could finally offer reliable schedules. Doolittle's blind flight did not make headlines like Lindbergh's Atlantic crossing, but its impact on aviation was just as deep. Every pilot since has flown through clouds, landed in fog, or flown through a storm at night. They owe something to the man who trusted his instruments when every instinct screamed otherwise. Raoul Lufbery, Rickenbacker's mentor, did not survive the war, but his tactics and courage shaped the first American ace of aces. Doolittle, Rickenbacker, and Lindbergh each conquered different frontiers: combat, endurance, and science. Together they transformed the airplane from a daredevil's contraption into a machine that could carry civilization across any sky. If you have stories of early aviation, family memories of the barnstorming days, or recollections of the first time you flew, we would love to hear them in the comments below. We read every one. Please take a moment to subscribe to this channel and give this video a like so we can continue bringing you these stories from history. Thank you for listening.